I'd like to say welcome to all of you. I thank you for coming out and taking the time, and tonight in particular on a dark and stormy night when probably all that you wanted to do was curl up beside your fireplace or whatever you might want to curl up beside, and yet you take the effort and find yourself here. So we're grateful, and I think your kids are probably grateful as well. So thank you so much for coming out. As always, when we start, I like to do a little bit of a survey and find out how many folks here are junior school parents. Awesome. How many middle school? Okay, senior school? Wow, big response from senior. That's great. And how many of you have been to a session like this before, one of our Learning in the Brain series? Oh, welcome back. I'm always amazed people come back. And how many of you, is this your first time at one of these sessions? Oh, and so welcome to all of you as well. Great. So we've been talking a little bit about over the year, we've been talking about things like fixed and growth mindset. If you came earlier this fall, we talked about introversion and extroversion. And what we like to do is pick out some topics that connect you with us as the educators of your children and your children. We like to sort of think of it as a bit of a triangle. And so tonight we're looking at strengths. And I come to you as a facilitator of these sessions, as a person who says, what do you think about this idea, and how does that fit with this idea? And also as a mom of 3 who are now older, 18 and 21 and 23. And for me, that job is and was and continues to be my most important job. So that's what we bring here. We also bring you together because we know a lot about learning that we didn't used to know. So for me to stand and deliver for an hour, those of you who have been here before, you've heard my song and dance around this, the brain research would say, yeah, that just may not sink in fully. And so there will be moments tonight where we stop, chat, think about something, question something, because hopefully that will help you to take the learning into your long-term memory. And that's what we're encouraging kids and teachers to be doing in classes as well. So, I'm going to set the context for you. How many of you, if you got the invitations, looked at the clip that I sent you on that invitation? Oh, good. Not too many. That's great. Because I'm going to show it to you now. So I'm intrigued by the ideas of this gentleman named Marcus Buckingham. I'm not sure how many of you may have bumped into him before, but he has worked for several years for Gallup Poll, about 17 or 18 years. And then he got really intrigued by the idea of strengths. And he's gone off on this sort of track, or he calls it the strengths revolution, really, where he's been sharing that idea across the country, mainly with business folk. And so I want to just play the clip for you to set the stage for us tonight as we consider the idea of cultivating strengths.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Buckingham.
How many of you are parents? Okay, you're part of the problem. Gallup asked this question of parents. Your child comes home with the following grades: English, A; Social Studies, A; Biology, C; Algebra, F. Which grade deserves the most attention from you? The question doesn't say if you pick one grade, you must henceforth ignore all others. It just says, hey, look, as a parent, you've only got one thing to invest in your child: your time. Where will you spend most of it? 77% of American parents say the F. So the sad fact is that most conversations around most kitchen tables or dinner tables in this country are around the child's flaws and failings and how to fix them. Most children in this country are characterized by the people who love them the most by who the child isn't, rather than who the child is. Now, you may listen to this and you may say, well, look, what can I do? The school system is set up to focus on the F. I can't let a kid fail a class. Now, first of all, I'd say that wasn't the question. The question just says where you spend most time. You can't ignore the F. And yes, you'd be right. The school systems in this country are set up to be remedial. But change is happening. There are some schools around this country that are deliberately and explicitly trying to become strengths-based, which means they're trying to help kids to identify what their strengths are and use them productively.
He's a provocative speaker, and we're going to get a chance a little bit later to look in a little more detail at one clip, a little longer video clip. But I like that because it starts to raise some questions. How do we as parents spend our time in conversations with our kids? What are the things that we're focusing on as we do that? And what I love at the end is that he talks about schools, and as we go through tonight, we will be making connections with some of the work that we're doing here at St. Michael's, because we really want to have those strengths-based conversations with your kids and our students. And so we'll talk to you a little bit about how we're doing that tonight. I want you to think for just a second about a question that you might have about strengths. So just something that comes into your mind. We'll just do sort of a 20-second quiet think. And then I'm interested in hearing a few of those questions. Who has a question about strengths? I'm not going to answer them. I'm just going to throw them out.
Is it a trait?
Great question. Thank you. Is it a trait? In other words, is it innate? Is it what is in us? Okay, awesome. Yep?
Is often a strength or weakness.
Is often a strength or weakness? Good question. Your greatest strength is your greatest weakness comes from that saying.
Is it personality driven?
Okay. Any other questions coming to mind around strengths? These are great ones, yeah? Oops, sorry, we've got two going up there at the very back. How do you develop the strengths? And sorry, where was the other one?
How much of the environment influences your strength?
Environmental influence? Something back there? No. Okay. So we'll try to keep those questions in mind as we go through, because I think some of the material that we're looking at tonight will help to answer some, and we'll also have further discussion. So what are our goals for tonight? We're going to, I think we need to define strengths and weaknesses. And I'm going to use Marcus Buckingham's definition. Then we can think about whether that works or not for us, but it's a place to start. I want us to utilize a couple of tools to think about our own strengths and weaknesses and then about our kids. Always easier to get in the space yourself and then think about the application to your own kids. I do want to show you a segment. Marcus Buckingham talks about myths and truths. And I think, again, this will really help us in our conversations with our kids. And we continue to build our learning together. Many of you are back for, a second, third, fourth session. And so I think it's really important that we build the connections between sessions, and we'll be doing that as well tonight. This is the agenda, which we're now at moving through. And so we're going to talk a little bit about strengths. How would you define your strengths? As I was reading through the material from Marcus Buckingham, I noticed that, and he made a really good point, that from the time that we are little, it seems like other people define our strengths, right? When we're really little, our parents told us what we were really good at. And then as we got a bit older and went into school, our teachers told us what we were good at. And then perhaps as we left school and went on to the workplace, our boss and our colleagues told us what we were good at. And so Marcus Buckingham is looking at defining strengths as something internal, something that we know and understand to be true about ourselves. And so there's a bit of a challenge there, right? How do we get clear about what our strengths are when, for a good portion of our life, other people have defined it? And then as we get clear, how do we communicate about that? How do we say what we're strong at clearly? And how do we say what we're weak at clearly as well? And many of you have probably been in those job interview situations where they ask you, well, what is a weakness that you have in a job interview? And so you'll say, well, I don't know, I really work too hard, right? I never go home. And you put that out as a weakness, but it's really not. I mean, that was some of the coaching we had going into job interviews, wasn't it? How can you frame, a weakness as a strength? So we need to get clear in terms of our communication about both strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so in the package that I gave you, on the second page actually, there's a little bit of a strengths test. A lot of the material that you'll have in your package is from Marcus Buckingham's book called Go Put Your Strengths to Work. That's the book I mainly used, although he has some other really great books as well. So what I want you to do here for just a minute is think about, and we're going to do this again with ourselves first. I want you to think about something that you would identify as a strength of yours, okay? So something that you've noticed, perhaps others have noticed as well, but you really know and think it's a strength that you have. And I want you to write a couple of them just at the top, or think about them if you don't have anything to write with. And then kind of go through, he has this SIGN acronym to talk about, and rank the success of it, the instinct, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those mean, but this is just kind of like a pre-quiz. Okay, is everybody clear? So you're going to think about a strength and work your way through this for your own self now. We'll take it and apply it to our kids in a little bit, for sure we will. I have a 3-minute timer, but you won't need 3 minutes, I don't think. That's our little signal. Okay, so that's kind of just a pre-test to get your thinking going around what are the places that your strength is showing up, how often, how well, that sort of thing. I want to talk to you about the ingredients that Buckingham says go into strengths. Then we'll come back to this SIGN, success instinct acronym as well. So he talks, and this sort of answers one of the questions that was asked earlier. Is it innate? Is a strength innate? Is it something we're born with? Or does it develop? Where does the environment come into it? So you have raised some really great questions. So Marcus Buckingham, in his definition of strengths, kind of says that strengths are made up of 3 pieces, if you will, that are woven together. The first ingredient is talent. And that is that sort of innate, born with you, will stay with you kind of trait that you carry with you through your life. So some examples are empathy, assertiveness, competitiveness. You could think of a bunch of them, I'm sure. Some of the tests, like a Myers-Briggs inventory or Strengths Finder, some of these sort of inventories are really helpful to dig into, especially the talent, sort of innate piece of it. Secondly, he talks about skills. So you build up the skills, you learn those in order to be able to do whatever the particular task is. And thirdly is knowledge. So having, again, knowledge of what you need to do. So the examples, one of the folks he was working with, I think a nurse, yeah, I do think a nurse, said that one of her strengths was that she was able to give injections in a way that felt pretty painless, or the patient said seemed painless. Okay, so her strength was giving injections that seemed painless. And Marcus Buckingham broke that down to sort of say, well, the talent in that, or the sort of innate piece of it, would be empathy. She's feeling for her patients. She's able to enter in and knowing, that they're a bit anxious or worried about an injection. And then the second piece, the skills, would be, what are the steps you go through to actually physically give an injection? Right? So she's figuring those skills out as she goes along. And then the third piece is the knowledge. How much do I give? When do I give it? All of those bits. So translate that to more of a business setting. Someone else identified a strength as closing a deal when it's the competition is sort of close at hand. Like being able to close those deals in a really crucial moment when there's a lot of competition. So again, if we take that apart, we look at the talent, and that could be competitiveness, assertiveness. The skill could be being able to analyze the markets and competitively understand what all of those numbers mean. And the knowledge could be just the knowledge of the competitors in that market. So you can see how it sort of starts to break down. I was trying to apply that to my own kid, like to think, okay, how would this work, this sort of threesome in the life of my own kids? And I think, I would say all 3 of my kids, but one in particular is very strong at getting a group of people to do something in a group activity to accomplish something, right? She's very good at going into whatever situation, saying, okay, people, here we're going to go, roll up your sleeves, off we go. So what is the strength in that? Well, there's a level of empathy or confidence or connectedness, relationally smart piece that gets her in the door. she also has to know, well, what's a process to get people to do stuff? First we do this, and then we do this, and then, so there's some skill in that. Yes, and then there's also some knowledge about where it is that she wants to take the group and how the group would interact with that. So that's kind of how I tried to apply it. But it's something that I think you need to take a bit of time and sort of wrap your head around. What I really liked, though, as I read more deeply, because you listen to Marcus Buckingham speak, and he's kind of this really gregarious, outgoing, amazing speaker, and you're like nodding. But then I'm thinking, well, he says, play to your strengths and just manage around your weaknesses. What I was excited to see was that there's a huge learning component to strengths. And so that really fits with what we've been talking about together. So as we dig a little bit more deeply into the signs of strength, which is what you were looking at when you were kind of rating yourself on that scale, if you feel successful at something, that's a really good place to start in terms of identifying your strength. But depending on your temperament, you might be too harsh or too easy on yourself in terms of whether that in fact is success. So it's really about knowing yourself. If you have something that you're effective at, that's another really good indicator. So success is a piece of that. And you want to be thinking about not just what have I been good at in the past, what have I done successfully historically, but what will I do going forward that will continue to build on the strengths and passions that I have. So he asks questions like, where will you improve the most as you train and practice? What's the area that you'll grow in? Where will you be your most creative as you generate new ideas? What activities will fulfill and sustain you? So these are pieces that we need to consider when we're thinking about success. It's not just that you got to the highest point, you made the most money, you were the most, but what is it that's energizing and sustaining you? I want to just tell you a little story that I read from Marcus Buckingham's book that really, I think, illustrates this point well. There was a little boy named Matt. He was about 6 or 7 years old, and he was at a public swimming pool with his mom, and a swim coach saw him swimming and felt that he had the most beautiful, natural front crawl he'd ever seen. And so the coach went to the mom and said, your son is amazing at swimming. You ought to get him onto a swim team. And so the mom thought, this is great, okay. Always looking for an outlet for the energy of a 7-year-old boy. Some of you may identify with that. And so she hunted around and she found a swim team, and the coach, she brought her son Matt to trials, and for the first 10 or 15 minutes, he was just overwhelmed by all the splashing and length swimming, and he actually faked that he couldn't swim and was drowning. And Mom marched over to the side of the pool, and she had a little chat with Matt and said, buddy, you need to do what you know how to do and do it well. This is why we're here. Step up. And so he stepped up, and he was an amazing swimmer. And he swam not only great front crawl, but also back crawl and butterfly. I mean, he was a competitor across all strokes. And so he began the life of a swimmer, which, as some of you know who have kids that do this, is a good 2 hours in the morning and maybe 2 hours again in the evening, and very devoted. And as he got to high school, he was on the varsity team. He was winning medals. He was also suffering from migraines as he was heading into meets and becoming less and less interested in wanting to do it, and more like he didn't. And what he also noticed was that when he would go home and pick up his guitar, his soul would sing. He would love it. It was just an amazing experience. And so in grade 11, Matt said to his coach, I'm not swimming anymore. I'm done. His coach thought this was crazy, all this talent going to waste, and what do you mean you're not going to swim? And his mom the same, and Matt just held to his guns. He said, I'm not swimming. I don't love swimming. I love music. I want to do music. And so he went on, Marcus Buckingham says, to become a sound producer, to play 6 or 7 instruments. And his skill, his strength, his talent in all of that was taking people who it was their first time recording and building the bridge and helping them to feel comfortable and competent in their work. So strength, success is a piece of it, but the part of it that's really important, and I think the thing we need to really focus on with our kids, is what energizes you, what makes you feel strong and passionate at what you're doing, not just that you're good at it. Because I think there's a lot of kids in these our school who are good at a lot of things. And what we notice is them trying to figure out what to do with all those things, right? How to fill in, how to manage all that they ought to be doing. The second piece in the sign part is instincts. Often a strength is something we're just drawn to. We volunteer our time. We're pulled into it. There's something in that that's drawing us there. And a way to discover your strength is to begin to ask those questions. Why am I drawn to that activity? What is it about that pulls me in? The third G is for growth. And the idea that as we're doing and learning new things, we're growing new dendrites, new brain pathways, and that's a really powerful place to be. In fact, one person called this place flow, that place where you're doing your activities that you love so much that time passes and you're not even aware of it. I don't know if any of you can think of an experience where you do that, but you're lost in it. And then there are those other ones, right? The ones where you're looking at the clock and you're like, really, 5 minutes only just went by? I don't know if any of you are doing that tonight, but that sometimes happens, right? And then the last one is needs. So after you've done an activity, what are you feeling? Do you need to do it again? Do you want to do it again? Or are you just so grateful to be done with that activity and ready to move on to the next thing? These sort of questions are ways that you can start to really dig into strengths. Is this a strength for me? And there are ways, I think, that we can talk to our children about their strengths. And you know, the dictionary, I'm trained as an educator. You can't use the word in the definition. But no matter where I looked for Marcus Buckingham, he always talked about the fact that strengths are things that strengthen you, that make you strong, that move you into that place of feeling really good about what it is you're doing and knowing that you do it well. So where does practice fit in with all of this? Just some thoughts up there to kind of think about. I wondered, and there's a question in the book about, what about activities that are all appetite and no ability? Or minimal ability? Things you love to do, but you're not very good at it. And Marcus Buckingham says we have a name for that. It's hobbies. We don't necessarily call those strengths, right? Those are things we're exploring and trying to get better at. Hobbies. So anyway, just a way to think about that as well as we go through. So we touched a little bit at the beginning about that idea of who told us what we were good at, and how do we claim that right back to be able to say, how do we judge our strengths? How do we help our kids? And in a few minutes we'll talk to you about what some of the things we're doing here at St. Michael's. How do we help our kids to be able to feel the confidence to judge the strengths themselves, to have the conversations with us around, you know what, when I'm doing this thing, I just love it. I lose track of time. And for us to just join that conversation. So we are the best judge of our own strengths. And then there are all sorts of tools that we can use as well. This book, Go Put Your Strengths to Work, also has a whole bunch of cards at the back and an online tool. So there's all sorts of things available, and I've given some websites in the handout as well that you can go on and pull some of the resources off to help with that. This is in your package, and I really liked it as a checklist. And I think it's pretty, for most of the students we have, this might be a really helpful starting point in a conversation. Strengths are things that, these are the things I think when I'm doing my strengths, and what I'm feeling and what I want to do. And then the opposite you can see there in the weaknesses. And then just another little, Marcus Buckingham has made a lot of money packaging all of these things up and sending them out. And it's great because they're all brain friendly, right? If you've got the word down the side, then you can sort of remember them, which is great. So how are we going to put our strategies to work? And some of the ideas in here is to focus, Release, I'm not sure if I put this one in your package. You're flipping and it makes me think no. Okay, these will be up on the website though, if you're looking, and they're also on the websites I gave you from Marcus Buckingham. So focus, release, find the places where you can put your strengths in, learn some new techniques to build your strength and expand your job around the strength. So interesting as adults, first of all, to think about this. How would we, if we discovered that we had a strength and we wanted it to play out more in our place of work or in our homes or whatever, wherever it would play out, how would we actually go about that? Because I think that if we think that through a little bit, we'll be able to help our kids with that, right? So if I discover that I have a strength and I'm really passionate about something, how do I maneuver my job to the degree that I can so that I can play to those strengths, so that I can use those strengths? And some of us have more or greater or less degree of flexibility around that. But I think we need to think about it. Same with our kids. You know, if you only have a finite amount of time as a child, then I think you want to pick out the things that really, for the most part, I mean, our kids are learning and we want to expose them to lots of things and we want them to keep being in that place of strength. You know, keep learning and growing from a place of strength. Weakness is kind of the opposite of strengths. And weaknesses, according to Marcus Buckingham, is a lot about what drains you. You know that you're using an area that is not a strength of yours if when you're done, you're done. Like that feeling of just, like sometimes when I find when I'm doing something that's playing to my strengths, I may be really tired at the end of the day, but I'm energized, if you know what I mean. Whereas when you're playing to your weaknesses, you're like done. You're yawning, you're just want to go home and sleep. And so again, there isn't really in the signs of weakness, it's where you've tried something over and over again and it's not happening. And so it weakens you. There isn't a lot of success happening in this area. It's not something you can really get excited about. You tried, it's not happening. There isn't a whole lot of growth happening, and we're going to watch a video in a minute that will talk about that. Neither does it meet sort of your needs. That's that tiredness at the end of it. So he uses sign again as a way to think about weaknesses. I think I did actually put that in your package. And again, just some cues to kind of look at and think about. We don't have to spend a lot of time on that right now. One of the things that I did kind of want to raise here, though, and he talks about this, is stop shoulding. And what I mean by that is, as adults, we get to a place and it's like, well, at this point in my career, I should be doing blah, blah, blah. I should be responsible for people, or I should be able to do whatever. And his thing is that that's really connected to weakness, this feeling of guilt, and you're being propelled into something that you don't really want to do, but you should do it. And so I just want to kind of highlight that because I've just become really aware of this word in the last couple of years in my own family, and my kids are like, oh, Mom, there you go again. But I'm like, don't use that word, should. And when you think about should and you find yourself saying it, think about what's around it. It's often attached to an activity that has some guilt or some, we got to hunker down and do this. I know we don't want to do it. And what else could you say? You know, for me, it's like, oh, I really should exercise. And it doesn't make me want to do it at all when I think about it like that. But if I say to myself, I could exercise, it's a whole different feeling. And I know it's only language and I know it's only semantic, but I would challenge you as you go forward to think about when you use that word, what's it being used in relation to? And how might that connect possibly to strengths and weaknesses? Just a thought. So ways to stop weaknesses. Again, challenges. Yeah, great stories in his books. I won't bore you with all of them, but one hotel woman, she stopped doing a portion of her work that she hated, and nobody noticed. 3 months went by, the quarterly report gave the same numbers, and she's like, cool. Because sometimes things are in place that have been there for a long time, and nobody notices, and they just propel it, right? So yeah, stop doing the activity, see if anyone notices. Team up with someone who is strengthened by what weakens you. Offer up your strengths. And then perceive your strengths from a different position. So that's just kind of a different perspective. Sometimes we have to do things that aren't our strengths. Like, that's just reality. But if we think about it in a different way, I could learn more about doing this. If I have to do something that weakens me, I'm going to do it between 8 and 10 in the morning because that's when I have the most energy. Like, those sorts of ideas, just to change the perspective and give yourself a chance to do it a little bit better. All right. So I want to show you, I don't normally show this video clip is about 13 to 14 minutes. But it's really Marcus Buckingham. It's the first in a series of 6. And it's called Trombone Player Wanted, but he's going to speak to some of the myths and truths around strengths. I've highlighted the myths and truths on one of your sheets. What's interesting is there's a whole story going on in the background, and you're only seeing the first bit, but Trombone Player Wanted, if you kind of think about strengths and weaknesses and watch this little guy and what's going on, you may begin to get the start of the story. So I want you to think about the myths and truths. These are only the truths according to Marcus Buckingham, so we have every right to discuss them. I'm going to just leave it there. There's a third myth around team, but I would really like to get to the application with our kids. And so I'm going to give you just a minute or two to talk with your elbow partner about those 2 myths. So the myth about as you grow, your personality changes versus as you grow, you become more of who you are. Or the other one, you will grow most in your areas of greatest weakness, you'll grow most in your areas of greatest strength. So just talk about, do you agree, do you disagree, where do you see that showing up for just a minute or two, and then we'll look at the application to our kids. Okay, I'm going to bring you back together. Pretty animated discussion. I could hear strengths and weaknesses and words like that flying around. I want you to hold those thoughts because we're going to do a couple more things and then we'll have a bit of time at the end for some questions. But I want to do 2 things. I want to think about and let you know the beginnings of what we're doing here at St. Michael's around this. I want to think then about some case studies. What would happen in your home? How would you have the conversation with some different age groups? And finally, there's a sort of tips and 10 different tips to talk to our kids about strengths. So we're going to kind of head in that direction. So the session that we'll have in February has been one that we've been building to through last year and this year. And I really would like to, we'll be pulling in a variety of research, but we'll mainly be sharing in some detail with you what the work is that we're doing at the school around strengths, around student pathways, around the learning and celebrating the passions of our students. So what I will tell you tonight is just a bit of a taster to what is coming in February. And I would encourage you to be here because it's a great opportunity for conversation. So currently we do a lot of work with the adults in the building, and part of what we do is try to highlight and give them ways of knowing what their strengths are. So our heads of department have done Myers-Briggs, they've done Strengths Finder, and we continue to talk about that. We're heading off to a retreat later this week where we'll continue to circle back and go deeper with their strengths. We've done some work with middle school faculty over the last few years as well. Becky Anderson, can you wave? She's at the back, stand up, wave. Becky's our Director of Learning, Leadership, I'm learning. It's getting late. And Becky has been great, very supportive this year. She was away on sabbatical last year, and I can't imagine how we even survived without her. But she's been very supportive this year for these sessions. And she's really working with our kids on leadership. And one of the exciting pieces is that they're starting the Strengths Finder. Marcus Buckingham partnered with a gentleman by the name of Clifton, who is no longer with us, but he created a Strengths Finder, an inventory. And they have a kid version. And so we're introducing it in grade 7 and grade 9 this year so that we give our kids an opportunity to talk about it. We've done it for a number of years in the prefects and some leadership roles, and we're just expanding as we go along. We're also, one of my main pieces in my portfolio fits with our strategic plan, Fulfilling Student Promise. And so we're developing an e-portfolio. You'll hear more about this as a tool for conversations between parents and teachers and kids around their strengths. We're trying to capture moments, and we'll be showing you some of this in February, of the student's life through school and where some of those strengths are showing up that we're noticing, that the students are noticing and sharing with you. When you look at our mission and our vision, it's about strengths, right? Our school seeks the excellence in all of us, and our vision is about discovering the promise in ourselves and our world. So when I go to my weekly meetings with the head of school, Bob, and I'm talking about this stuff, he's like, well, yes, this is our vision. This is what we do. And so I was really excited as I was preparing for this session to see how it all sort of fits together. So more about that as we move into the new year, but I would encourage you to ask questions and to come along to that and hear more about what we're doing. In your package, there is, at the very last, I think, or near the end, a case study. We've just created, if you have a student in junior, middle, or senior school, an option there to have a look and see what's the situation, how could you, knowing what you know now about strengths, what would the conversation look like with that student? Maybe make it your student around some of those things. So I just, again, want to give you a couple minutes to look at that. Maybe just pick one that's most relevant for your age group. Think about how you would manage it, and then we'll just wrap up with some tips and ideas for helping our kids in their strengths. Feel free to talk to the person beside you or around you about what would you do if that was your scenario. What would some of the questions be? So hopefully as you, and again, we'll stay in a minute and do some questions, but hopefully as you are thinking about that, you're thinking about the kinds of questions you might ask at the appropriate ages for your students. And just to help with that as well, I included 10 tips for discovering, and I just want to highlight, there's 10 ideas there. I thought some of them were interesting. Others, you're like, well, I'm not sure if I'd use that. And that's kind of the joy of parenting, right? We pick things that work for us. So seek out what makes your child unique. So often we want our children to fit in. And so that sort of, it could be that desire for being the center of attention, to entertain people, is really about a strength. I mean, you need to moderate that, obviously, as a parent. But what is going on for your children? What makes them unique as they move through their lives? So seeking that out. And the other suggestion they had that kind of linked to that was making a strengths journal. Like, what are you noticing as they're moving through? And again, we're hoping to capture some moments as the kids move through school as well, so we can all have those conversations. Listen to your children. I keep being reminded as I spend time with my kids that I really need to listen. They're living their lives, not my life, not the extension of my life. And so I need to listen. And even when things are like, really, you did that? Those kind of conversations, you're still listening and asking those good questions to help your kids drill down. The idea number 6 about resist the urge to evaluate everything and overstate expectations. This goes back to things we've talked about previously, like grit and resilience. And we want our kids to think that failure is part of the learning journey. We don't want them to be terrified to try stuff and fail. And so what do those conversations look like? And what are the little things we're willing to, let them fail at to build that up? We don't want them to fail a course, and we will do everything in our power here to help them not to do that. But we will have conversations along the way about the learning that happens through that. And they will have to pass on their own. So it's that balance between letting our kids fail and not making it a huge thing, and allowing them to become who they need to be. Letting kids tell their own stories. Not comparing. So hard not to do, but so important, I think. I'm amazed as a mom of 3 how unique each of my kids are. And as soon as I would start down the road, if I would start down the road to compare one to the other, it's just minimizing their uniqueness. And if we're about strengths and we're about feedback to them about who they are, we need to be very careful about the comparisons. And then, as with our children, we want to give them as many choices as possible. Because we don't know. They're growing and developing. We're going to be learning as they make their way through school and beyond what those strengths are. And so we want to create space for that in our conversations with them, trying as many options as we can. And just the last piece is about perspective. Our kids are all growing and developing. They're not done. And we all bring our own filters to this. For one person, a child who's acts caring can be labeled as really good, and we all would think that. Telling a joke in school maybe seem to be disruptive, but maybe not to somebody else. We all bring our own lenses. And so recognize, what's your lens? What's the thing that's happening for you in conversation with your kids? It's a really important piece. So just letting you know some of the upcoming things. February 17th, we've switched the date. So on the calendar, it's January. We've moved it. And Brain Awareness Week is there as well. And we just have a couple of minutes for questions, and then we'll do the draw. So as you were either thinking about the myths or the case study, are there any questions that came up around strengths? And Becky will help me answer these questions, I'm sure. Anything that came up for you as you were thinking about those pieces? Cool, y'all got it? This is good. Going on home? Okay. Strengths is definitely an ongoing conversation, and one that we look forward to continuing to have as we learn about it as well. We'll just collect your sheets. Is that what we're doing now, Laura? So that we can draw for the books, and then you can head back out into the rain, or you could have a bit more wine and cheese if you wish. Thank you again for coming out in the rain, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send them my way. Help yourself to wine and cheese, head out into the rain, have a great rest of the week.